The unbelievable will. The Galactic Council chamber was filled with laughter. Echoing, mocking, endless laughter. Aliens of all shapes and sizes pounded their fists on the grand marble table, some gasping for breath, others wiping away tears. The scene was nothing short of a cosmic joke. A human had inherited the ugliest princess in the galaxy. At the center of it all stood Captain James Carter, a human diplomat from Earth, arms crossed, watching the spectacle with a raised eyebrow. He had received strange reactions in his career before: fear, respect, even jealousy. But this was different. High Chancellor Ervac, a reptilian leader with golden scales, finally caught his breath. Oh, this is too good. The great King Zirin, before his death, left his most precious gift to you, human, his daughter Valera. The laughter exploded once again. Some aliens nearly fell out of their chairs. James remained silent. He let them have their moment. He knew better than to react. King Zirin had been a powerful ruler. His empire spanned across 3 star systems. His death had left a power vacuum, and now the Galactic Council was scrambling to secure control. But instead of choosing a powerful warlord or a noble family, the king had named a human in his will. And not just for land, wealth, or even a fleet. He had left his daughter. To James, the holographic will was still floating in the air, repeating the last words of the king. Captain James Carter of Earth, my most trusted friend, I leave you my daughter, Princess Valera, to protect, to guide, and to rule beside you. The words carried weight, but the council only saw it as an insult. A short, pudgy alien with 8 eyes, Counselor Drim, cackled. Oh, this is cruel. What crime did the human commit to deserve such a fate? Poor thing. More laughter, more mockery. James remained calm, his blue eyes steady. He had seen battle, had faced impossible odds in the void of space, but never had he felt the need to prove himself to a room full of fools. Counselor Ziara, a tall, elegant insectoid, leaned forward, smirking. Come now, Captain. No need to pretend. You must be furious, tricked into taking the most hideous creature in the kingdom as your responsibility. We all know King Zirin's daughter is a disgrace. James finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm. And what makes you think that? The laughter stopped. A few aliens exchanged glances. High Chancellor Ervac hissed. Everyone knows. She is scared, deformed. A freak. Even her own people reject her. Is that so? James tilted his head. Because from where I'm standing, the only freaks here are the ones laughing at a woman they've never even met. The chamber fell into silence. The council was powerful. They were used to lesser species bowing before them. No one had ever dared insult them like this. James let the words sink in before he continued. I don't know what kind of rulers you are, but where I come from, we don't judge someone by how they look. We judge them by their character, their actions, their strength. He took a step forward, his presence commanding. King Zirin was no fool. If he left his daughter in my care, it means she is worth more than you can comprehend. Counselor Drim scoffed. Ha! This is just human pride. You will see, Captain. When you meet her, you will regret this day. You will beg us to take her back. James smirked. You assume I have a choice. The council members froze. James turned to the holographic will. His words were clear. I am bound by honor and duty. I accept. Gasps filled the chamber. No one had expected this. No rejection. No disgust. Just acceptance. Ziara clicked her mandibles. You actually accept. James nodded. I do. Ervac's tail lashed behind him in frustration. Then may the gods have mercy on your soul, human. You have inherited a curse. James walked out of the chamber without another word, leaving the council shaken and confused. What had just happened? A human had been given what was meant to be a punishment, and he had embraced it. What kind of game was Captain James Carter playing? And more importantly, what did he know that they didn't? The galactic bet. The spaceport of Tyran Prime was eerily quiet as Captain James Carter's shuttle landed. The city, once home to a powerful empire, now felt like a fading memory, its golden towers darkened by the shadow of uncertainty after the king's passing. But James wasn't here for politics. He was here to meet Princess Valera. The Galactic Council had given him an official escort, not for his protection, but for their amusement. They wanted to see the exact moment when James would regret his decision. As James stepped out of the shuttle, he noticed the eyes on him. The city's inhabitants, tall, gray-skinned humanoids with glowing blue eyes, whispered among themselves. The human actually came. Does he not know? He will flee the moment he sees her. James ignored them, his gaze fixed ahead. A grand palace loomed in the distance, its once proud banners torn and frayed. King Siren's death had left a power struggle behind, and Valera was caught in the middle of it. A short, stout alien named Kryn approached him, a council-appointed diplomat with a face that looked like a melted candle. He grinned. "Ah, Captain Carter. Welcome. I must say, you are full of surprises." James offered a polite nod. "I tend to be." Kryn chuckled. "I assume you are eager to see your prize." James exhaled sharply. "She is not a prize." The alien smirked. "Oh, the council sees it differently. You inherited a curse, Carter. A burden." He leaned in. "Care for a wager?" James raised an eyebrow. "A wager?" Kryn gestured to the nearby crowds of nobles and merchants, all watching with amused curiosity. "The entire Galactic Council is betting on you. Some say you will run away within the hour. Others think you will demand we take her back." His voice dropped to a whisper. "No one believes you will stay." James smirked. "And you?" Kryn tapped his chin. "Well, personally, I think humans are unpredictable creatures, but even you have limits." James took a step closer. "Then let me make my own bet." Kryn blinked. "Oh." James crossed his arms. "I bet that your entire council has made the mistake of underestimating both me and Valera. And by the time this is over, the only ones regretting anything will be you." Kryn chuckled, though there was uncertainty in his gaze now. "We shall see, Captain. We shall see." The doors to the palace creaked open. It was time. Meeting the ugly princess, James stepped into the dimly lit royal hall. The scent of aged wood and incense filled the air. Ancient banners, some covered in dust, lined the walls. The throne, once grand, now abandoned, stood at the far end of the chamber. And in front of it stood her, Princess Valera. She was taller than James expected, her posture rigid, almost defensive. A long cloak draped over her form, hiding most of her figure. Her deep violet skin shimmered under the faint light, but it was the scars that stood out. Jagged, deep lines ran across her arms and neck, remnants of an old, brutal injury. Her right eye was covered by a thin layer of dark fabric, but her other eye, at burning gold, stared at James with raw defiance. Not broken, James thought, just waiting for a reason to fight back. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Valera broke the silence. "So, you're the human." Her voice was soft, but there was steel beneath it. James took a step forward. "And you're the princess." She chuckled, though it held no humor. "That's what they call me, though not with kindness." James didn't flinch. "I don't care what they call you." That made her pause. Her golden eye narrowed slightly. "No. Then why are you here, human? Why did you accept my father's will? To mock me in person?" James shook his head. "I accepted because he asked me to. I don't break my word." Valera studied him. "Do you even know what you have inherited?" James shrugged. "From what I hear, a lot of people's bad opinions." She smirked at that. "And what if I told you they were right? That I am a curse?" James took another step, standing just a few feet away now. He tilted his head. I'd say curses don't look so powerful. Valera's smirk faded. Something flickered behind her golden eye. Shock, curiosity, maybe even hope. Before she could respond, Kryn stepped in, his voice dripping with amusement. Well, Captain, now that you've seen her, have you changed your mind? James didn't hesitate. No. Kryn blinked. No. James turned to Valera. Do you want to leave this palace? She frowned. What? Do you want to leave? James repeated. To get out of here. Away from the people who see you as nothing but a joke. Valera hesitated. You would take me? James nodded. If you're willing to trust me. She studied him, searching for deception. But all she found was certainty. Finally, she extended her hand. James took it without hesitation. Kryn's smirk faded. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. The human wasn't supposed to accept her. The council was expecting a fool. Instead, they had just handed a human diplomat a powerful, underestimated ally. And as James and Valera walked out of the chamber together, whispers spread through the palace. Something was changing. The council had made a bet. But for the first time, they might have just lost. The dark secret of the princess. The shuttle ride away from the palace was silent. James sat across from Valera in the dimly lit cabin, his arms crossed, watching her carefully. She sat stiffly, her hands resting on her lap, her golden eyes staring out at the distant city lights. The council had expected him to abandon her. Instead, he had taken her away, just as King Xiren had intended. The question that burned in his mind, however, was, why? Why had the king entrusted her to him? Why had the council been so eager to mock her? Why did she carry scars that looked more like battle wounds than deformities? Valera broke the silence first. You're either very brave or very stupid. James smirked. I hear that a lot. She turned to him, her gaze unreadable. You should have left me there. James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. If I wanted to leave you, I wouldn't have come at all. Valera exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. Then you don't know what you've gotten yourself into. James studied her carefully. Then tell me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, My father didn't die naturally. James' expression didn't change, but his body tensed. You're saying he was murdered? Valera nodded. Poison. Slow. Precise. Undetectable unless you knew what to look for. My father knew something was wrong, but by the time he figured it out, it was too late. James's mind raced. King Xiren had been a powerful ruler, but he had also made enemies. The Galactic Council had never fully accepted his rule. If he had been assassinated, then whoever was behind it was still in power. And you think the council was responsible? James asked. Valera scoffed. Not just responsible. They celebrated. She turned to face him fully. The moment he died, they declared my bloodline unfit to rule. They exiled my supporters, stripped me of all power. She gestured to herself. I became nothing but a joke to them. The ugly princess, the deformed hair. James frowned. They turned you into a symbol of failure. If people laughed at you, they wouldn't question what really happened. Valera nodded. Exactly. James let out a slow breath. And your father knew this would happen. Valera's expression darkened. He knew something worse would happen. That's why he left me to you. James raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Valera hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached up and pulled back the hood of her cloak, exposing her shoulders and neck. James's breath hitched. Her scars weren't just injuries. They were marks. Jagged lines of bioluminescent veins ran along her skin, pulsing faintly under the dim shuttle lights. They shimmered with deep violet energy, forming intricate patterns that James recognized immediately. Ancient warrior markings, a genetic trait seen only in the firstborn heirs of Saren's bloodline. James sat back. You're not just his daughter. Valera's golden eye locked onto his. I'm his weapon, a power that shouldn't exist. James rubbed his jaw, processing what he had just learned. If the council had known she had this kind of power, then of course they would want her gone. Because if she was strong enough to activate the markings, James swallowed. Your people's warrior markings, they only awaken when the heir is in a life-or-death battle, right? Valera nodded. James studied the glowing veins, which means someone already tried to kill you. Valera's expression hardened. Many times, James felt a cold anger settle in his chest. The council had mocked her, ridiculed her, treated her like a discarded piece of trash, all while trying to eliminate her in the shadows. And yet, she was still here. James smirked. So, that assassin back at the palace. Valera smirked back. Not the first. James exhaled. Right. The assassin's return. A warning light suddenly flashed on the shuttle's console. James's instincts flared. He turned to the pilot. An eye-controlled droid. What is it? Unknown vessel approaching, the droid replied. Energy weapons locked onto our shuttle. James stood instantly. Who the hell? Then he saw it. A sleek, black attack ship appeared from the clouds above, its hull bearing no insignia, no markings, no identification. Assassins. James barely had time to react before the first laser shot ripped through the air. Get down, he shouted, tackling Valera as the shuttle lurched violently. A second blast hit the wing, sending sparks flying. The AI pilot's voice remained eerily calm. Critical damage sustained. Emergency landing sequence initiated. James pulled Valera up. We need tow. The third blast hit. The entire shuttle spun out of control. Crash landing. The ship slammed into the dense jungle planet below, breaking through thick foliage before finally skidding to a violent stop. Silence. Then, pain. James groaned, his vision blurred. He pushed himself up, shaking debris off his body. Valera lay beside him, unconscious but breathing. The jungle around them was alive with eerie sounds. Strange glowing creatures scuttled away from the wreckage. Above, the assassin's ship circled like a predator, scanning for survivors. James clenched his fists. They weren't here to capture them. They were here to finish the job. The princess awakens. A low hum filled the air. James turned to see Valera's warrior markings glowing brighter than before. Her golden eye snapped open. She exhaled sharply, and when she spoke, her voice carried a power James had never heard before. They should have killed me when they had the chance. The assassination attempt. The jungle around them buzzed with alien life. Strange luminescent vines pulsed with bioluminescent light, while creatures with too many eyes scurried away, sensing the danger in the air. The thick canopy above barely allowed any light through, casting the wreckage of the shuttle in eerie shadows. Smoke curled from the torn metal, hissing as it met the damp, humid air. James Carter wiped the blood from his forehead, shaking off the dizziness. His military instincts kicked in, assess the damage, find cover, secure the princess. Princess Valera was already stirring. Her markings, those ancient warrior symbols embedded in her skin, pulsed faintly as she gasped for breath. Her golden eye snapped open. For a second, she looked lost. Then her gaze hardened. She remembered. We need to move, James said, offering his hand. Valera ignored it, pushing herself up. She was stronger than she looked. The assassins. Her voice was steady, but there was tension in it. James glanced up through the gaps in the trees. The black attack ship hovered above, its thrusters humming as it searched for movement. It hadn't fired again, which meant one thing. They were coming down to finish the job personally. James unholstered his pulse pistol, quickly checking its charge. They're hunting us. Valera's markings glowed a little brighter. She turned, her gaze scanning the darkened jungle. Then we make them regret it." James smirked. He liked the way she thought. The assassins arrive. The ship above suddenly stilled. A moment later, dark figures dropped from the sky, landing in the underbrush with precision. Their forms were almost invisible, cloaked in advanced light-bending armor that flickered with each movement. James had seen assassins before, but not like these. They were elite. No wasted movements, no hesitation. Their weapons were silent, sleek, and, most importantly, lethal. One of them stepped forward, tilting his head slightly. His voice, distorted by his helmet, rasped through the comms. "Princess Valera," he said, almost amused. "Your exile was generous. You should have accepted it." Valera stood firm, her shoulders squared. "And leave my father's murderers to rule." The assassin sighed. "Then we do this the hard way." James didn't wait. He fired first. The pulse pistol's blue energy bolt streaked through the air, hitting one of the assassins square in the chest. The impact sent him staggering, his cloaking flickering, but not breaking. Damn, their armor was more advanced than he thought. The others moved instantly, spreading out in a semicircle, trying to flank them. James grabbed Valera's arm and pulled her back behind a fallen tree. "We need to even the playing field." She gritted her teeth. "We need to end the playing field." Before James could argue, she moved. The princess strikes back. Valera leaped forward with inhuman speed. Her bioluminescent markings flared, glowing brighter than ever. The moment she landed among the assassins, the air around her shifted, almost like a gravitational pulse. James saw the nearest assassin stumble, caught off guard. Then Valera struck. She grabbed the assassin's wrist, twisted, and shattered his forearm with unnatural strength. James blinked. Okay, that was new. The assassin screamed, but she was already moving. A flicker of golden light traced her hands. She raised her palm toward another attacker, and a concussive blast of raw energy erupted outward. The second assassin was thrown backward, slamming into a tree with bone-crushing force. James took the opening and fired again, this time aiming for exposed joints. The shot hit true, piercing the armor's weak point at the neck. The assassin dropped. 3 down. The leader of the assassins, the one who had spoken, watched all of this in cold, eerie silence. James leveled his pistol at him. Last chance to walk away. The assassin didn't move. "We underestimated you, Captain Carter." His gaze flicked to Valera. "And you, Princess, you were supposed to be a failed experiment." Valera's eye flashed dangerously. "Try me." The assassin smiled and activated something on his wrist. The kill protocol. A shrill, high-pitched sound filled the air. James's stomach dropped. A beacon. The assassin had just signaled their ship for an orbital strike. Valera realized it too. "We need to move. Now." James cursed. "Where?" Valera turned toward the jungle. "There's an underground temple. Old ruins. I know the way." James didn't question it. He grabbed her hand, and they ran. Behind them, the assassin simply watched. He made no attempt to follow. James glanced back and saw why. The sky was lighting up. The orbital strike was already falling. Into the ruins. The ground trembled as the first blast struck the jungle, sending fire and debris in all directions. Trees snapped like twigs, the shockwave lifting James and Valera off their feet as they tumbled down a hidden slope. James hit the ground hard, rolling before slamming into ancient stone. He groaned. "Valera?" A few feet away, she was already pushing herself up. "We're here." James turned. His breath caught. They had landed at the entrance of a massive underground temple. Ancient carvings covered the towering stone archway, strange glowing symbols, ones that looked exactly like Valera's markings. James exhaled. "You've got to be kidding me." Valera placed her hand on the entrance. The markings on her arm reacted instantly, pulsing in harmony with the ruins. She turned to James. This is what they feared. Another explosion rocked the jungle above. The ground cracked. James looked at her, then at the temple, then back at the fire raining from the sky. He grinned. Then I think it's time we give them something to be afraid of. The princess's true form. The temple walls trembled as another explosion rumbled above. Dust and ancient debris rained from the high ceiling, disturbed for the first time in centuries. James Carter coughed, waving his hand in front of his face to clear the air. The glow of his pistol's energy cell provided little light against the vast darkness of the underground ruins. Beside him, Valera stood motionless, her golden eye fixed on the massive stone doors ahead. Her glowing warrior markings pulsed in rhythm with the carvings, as if the temple itself was alive and recognizing her presence. James took a step forward, his voice steady but cautious. You want to tell me what exactly this place is before it buries us alive? Valera exhaled, then placed her palm against the ancient symbols. It's not just a temple. It's a vault. James frowned. A vault for what? Valera turned to him, her expression unreadable. For me. Before James could ask what she meant, the carvings beneath her touch flared with blinding light. A deep, resonant hum echoed through the chamber as the doors groaned and shifted, sliding open. Ancient dust billowed outward, revealing a vast inner sanctum. Tall pillars lined the walls, leading to a massive crystalline structure at the center. James's breath hitched. Suspended inside the crystal was another version of Valera. No, not another version. The real her. Or rather, what she was meant to become. The secret of the Styrian bloodline. Valera stepped forward, staring at the suspended figure. Unlike her current form, the Valera inside the crystal was flawless, powerful, complete. Her scars were gone, replaced with full, radiant markings covering her entire body. Her second eye, once thought ruined, glowed with the same golden intensity as the first. James felt a chill run down his spine. He turned to Valera. Okay, I'm going to need a lot of answers. Fast. Valera didn't look at him. This is what my father was protecting. James glanced between her and the crystal. What? A backup version of you. She let out a bitter chuckle. Not quite. This is what I was supposed to become. James took a slow breath, putting the pieces together. The council, they knew about this. Valera nodded. They feared it. She turned to James, her expression sharp. My people's warrior markings, they aren't just for show. They unlock something deeper, a hidden potential within the royal bloodline. She gestured to the crystal. This is what happens when the transformation is completed. A fully realized Styrian war queen. A ruler who doesn't just lead with politics, but with power. James clenched his jaw. And the council didn't want that. They did everything to prevent it. Valera said, the exile, the mockery, the assassinations, my injuries, the scars. She trailed off, touching her arm. All of it was meant to stunt my transformation. James's mind reeled. They had mutilated her not just to humiliate her, but to cripple her true power. Valera let out a slow breath. My father hid me away before the process could be completed. He hoped that one day, someone would help me awaken it. James exhaled sharply. That's why he chose me. Valera met his gaze. Yes. The pieces fit together too perfectly. The council didn't just mock James for inheriting her. They wanted him to reject her, to abandon her, because if she was left without an ally, without a reason to fight back, her transformation would never be complete. James rolled his shoulders. So what happens if you wake up properly? Valera looked back at the crystal. Then the council won't just have a princess to deal with. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the glowing surface. The markings along her skin flared. The crystal cracked. James took a step back. Is this safe? Valera smirked. Not for them. The awakening. The temple shook violently. The crystal's cracks deepened, light pouring from within. The ancient pillars trembled as energy surged through the ruins. Outside, the assassins who had been hunting them paused mid-strike. Their leader, the masked operative, stared at his scanner in disbelief. "What's happening?" one of his soldiers asked. The leader's voice was grim. "The transformation is beginning." Inside the vault, the crystal shattered. A surge of raw energy exploded outward, and James barely had time to shield his eyes. When he looked back, Valera was no longer standing. She was floating. Her body glowed with power, her scars burning away into golden light. The markings along her skin were no longer faint. They were fully awakened, pulsing with a deep cosmic energy. Her second eye opened, no longer damaged, but burning with golden fire. James swallowed. This wasn't just a princess anymore. This was something else. Something legendary. The Council's fear realized. Far across the stars, within the halls of the Galactic Council, alarms blared. Chancellor Urvac rose from his seat, staring at the data streams pouring in from their spies. His golden scales darkened in fear. "No," he whispered. "It's not possible." Councillor Ziara, the insectoid politician who had mocked James the hardest, trembled as she read the words flashing on her screen. State use UPDAT XYRANBLOOD line. Awakened. The council chambers erupted into chaos. Their worst nightmare, a fully awakened war queen, had just returned. And she wasn't alone. She had a human at her side. One with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The council's shock. The Galactic Council chamber had never been silent before. Not even during war declarations, planetary crises, or trade disputes. There was always a murmur, a whisper, an argument. But now, absolute silence. High Chancellor Urvac's golden scales had lost their luster. His claws twitched against the cold metal of the grand table as he read the incoming reports. The Xiren hair has awakened. The words burned in his mind. The fools who had mocked James Carter, the human ambassador, were now pale with fear. The councillors exchanged panicked glances, their confidence crumbling. The transformation should have been impossible. Councillor Ziara hissed, her insectoid wings shuddering. She was broken, scarred. They assured us her body would never be able to complete the process. And yet, growled Councillor Drim, his 8 eyes narrowing, not only has she awakened, she has done so under the protection of a human. The word human dripped with contempt, but no one laughed this time. For years, humans were treated as a species of minor importance. Clever, yes. Ambitious, of course. But they were not an empire. They were not part of the great dynasties. The council had dismissed them as insignificant. And yet, one of them had just overturned their entire plan. Urvac slowly rose from his seat, his voice dangerously calm. "Where is the assassin strike team?" A low-ranking officer, trembling, stepped forward. "We lost contact after the transformation event, Chancellor. Scans indicate the underground temple collapsed." Urvac's tail lashed in frustration. "And the human?" The officer swallowed hard. James Carter was last detected standing at her side. He is still with her. The chamber erupted in arguments, accusations flying between councillors. This is a disaster. We must deploy our fleets now. No, we must contain the information before the galaxy learns. A new voice cut through the chaos. Cold. Calculating. Absolute. She must die. Now. The room froze. At the far end of the chamber, seated in the deepest shadow, Grand Executor Tarvis finally spoke. Unlike the other council members, diplomats, schemers, politicians, Tarvis was a tactician, a warlord, a man who had never lost a battle. He leaned forward, his cybernetic eye scanning the reports. The Xiren princess is no longer a joke. She is a threat. His gaze flicked toward Urvac. Your petty games failed. Now it is time for war. Urvac hesitated. If we send a fleet to Xiran space now, it will look like a direct attack. We do not have the authority." "We don't need authority," Tarvis said, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "We need force." He turned to the Council's communication officer. "Prepare the Oblivion Armada." Gasps filled the room. The Oblivion Armada was not an army meant for simple assassinations. It was a fleet reserved for the extermination of entire civilizations. Ervak's throat tightened. "This is madness. We cannot." Tarvis cut him off. "We can, and we will. If we hesitate, she will grow stronger. If we delay, the human will rally support for her. We end this before it begins." The order was given. Across the galaxy, ships stirred in the darkness. The deadliest armada the Council had ever assembled began its march. Their target, Villira, and they would burn the entire planet if necessary. A new queen rises. Far below, deep in the ruins of the ancient vault, James Carter stood beside a reborn war queen. The energy around them was still pulsing, the last remnants of Villira's transformation flickering across the stone walls. James exhaled, lowering his pistol. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew one thing. Everything had changed. Villira was no longer the hesitant, wounded princess he had met in the palace. The moment the crystal shattered, a different presence took hold. Her golden eyes no longer flickered with uncertainty. They burned with purpose. James tilted his head. "How do you feel?" Villira turned her gaze toward him, considering. Her voice was calm, steady, but powerful. "Like I finally woke up." Her body was no longer stiff with pain, no longer wrapped in the scars of her past. The markings across her skin glowed in perfect synchronization with the ruins. She wasn't a half-formed hair anymore. She was complete. James exhaled sharply. "Right. So, now what?" Villira turned toward the fallen debris. "Now we finish what my father started." James frowned. "And what was that?" She placed her hand on the temple walls. The ancient structure responded, as if waiting for her command. The ground rumbled. The restoration of the HFY Empire. James's stomach dropped. "That's going to upset some people." Villira smirked. "Good." Before James could respond, a distant boom echoed through the underground chamber. His instincts flared. He turned toward the source of the sound, the collapsed entrance. Someone was trying to break through. Villira's eyes darkened. The assassins. James shook his head. No, something bigger. A final warning. Outside the ruins, the skies above Xiran Prime burned. Hundreds of warships descended through the atmosphere, blocking out the stars. The Oblivion Armada had arrived. At the head of the fleet, Grand Executor Tarvis stood aboard his command ship, arms crossed. His cybernetic eyes zoomed in on the ruins below. He activated the planetary broadcast system. His voice thundered across the land, through every screen, every radio, every device. "To the people of Xiran Prime, you have harbored a fugitive, an enemy of the Galactic Council. This world is now under siege." The planet trembled as the first orbital strike hit the surface. Boom! James and Villira barely had time to react as the ground quaked beneath them. James clenched his jaw. Well, that escalated fast. Villira narrowed her eyes. "They fear me." "They fear what you'll become," James corrected. "And I think they just gave you exactly what you needed." Villira's markings glowed brighter, her energy surging. "This isn't fear," she said, stepping forward. "This is war." James smirked, checking his pistol's charge. "Then let's make them regret starting it." As the second orbital strike hit, the battle for Xiran Prime began. And for the first time in centuries, a true queen was ready to fight. Humanity's unexpected rise. The skies over Xiran Prime burned as the Oblivion Armada unleashed its full might. Explosions rippled across the city as plasma barrages rained down, reducing entire districts to rubble. The once proud capital, home to ancient dynasties, was now a war zone. On the ground, citizens fled in terror as the Council's shock troops deployed from massive troop carriers. Armored soldiers in dark metallic exosuits stormed through the streets, their weapons humming with deadly energy. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to exterminate. At the heart of it all, beneath the ruins of the ancient vault, Valera stood reborn. Her warrior markings pulsed like molten fire, her golden eyes locked onto the battle unfolding above. This was no longer a fight for survival. This was a reckoning. James Carter checked his pulse pistol one last time, his expression grim. "So, Queen, what's the plan?" Valera exhaled slowly. "We remind the galaxy why my bloodline was feared." She lifted her hand, and the ruins trembled. The ancient stone beneath them cracked as long-dormant machinery roared to life. James frowned. What exactly did we just activate? A low, mechanical hum filled the chamber. Then, the ground began to split apart. The awakening of the Tyran war titans. From the depths of the planet, giant structures began to rise. Colossal war machines buried for centuries beneath the capital. Titan-class war golems, massive humanoid constructs forged from an age when the HFY Empire ruled undisputed. Their bodies were covered in glowing glyphs, their ancient cores awakening at the touch of their rightful queen. Above, the Oblivion Armada hesitated. Their fleet commanders had expected resistance. They had not expected an army of ancient titans to rise from beneath the ground. Valera's voice was quiet, but it echoed across the battlefield. "This world is mine, and I will not fall." With a single motion of her hand, the titans moved. The battle for Xiron Prime. The first war golem swung its massive arm, colliding with a descending troop carrier. The ship crumpled like paper, crashing into a council-controlled outpost. Another titan raised its arm, and a beam of concentrated plasma tore through the sky, annihilating an enemy warship in a single shot. The tide of battle shifted instantly. James grinned as he ducked behind cover, taking down a squad of council soldiers. I have to admit, this is a hell of an upgrade. Valera moved beside him, effortlessly dodging blaster fire as her hands pulsed with raw energy. She barely needed to touch her enemies. Her mere presence was enough to disrupt their weapons, short-circuiting their systems before they could even aim. One soldier tried to raise his rifle. It exploded in his hands. Another lunged at Valera with a plasma blade. She caught it mid-swing, snapping the weapon with her bare hand. James whistled. "And I thought you were dangerous before." Valera smirked. "You haven't seen anything yet." The Council's final move. High above, on the Oblivion Armada's flagship, Grand Executor Tarvis seethed with fury. The battle should have been over already. The princess should have been dead. But now she was winning. "This is unacceptable," he growled, turning to his command staff. "Prepare the Planet Cracker warhead." Silence fell over the bridge. One of the officers hesitated. "Yes, sir. If we use that, we will destroy not just the city, but the entire planet." Tarvis snapped his gaze to him. "Then I suggest you obey before I have you executed for insubordination." The officer swallowed hard, then turned to input the command. The Oblivion Armada's deadliest weapon, a Planet Cracker warhead, was primed for launch. If it struck, nothing would survive. Humanity's arrival. The countdown began. 3 minutes. James and Valera fought their way through the battlefield, unaware of the impending annihilation, but deep in the void of space, just beyond the system's edge. A new fleet entered real space. Hundreds of warships, each marked with the insignia of Earth's unified fleet. At their head was the supercarrier UNSC Dauntless, the largest and most powerful ship in human history. Aboard the bridge, Admiral Rebecca Hale watched the battle unfold with calculating eyes. "Looks like our boy Carter was right. The Council was always going to betray us." Her comm officer turned. "Orders, Ma'am." Hale smirked. "Deploy all squadrons. We're taking that warhead offline." The final stand. James barely had time to react as dozens of human fighters screamed through the sky. engaging the Obsidian Armada's ships. The sudden arrival of Earth's fleet sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. The Council had expected one human. They hadn't expected an entire species. On the ground, Valera turned to James in surprise. "Your people came." James grinned. "Of course. You didn't think I came alone, did you?" Valera's golden eyes gleamed. "I suppose I chose my allies well." James smirked. "Damn right you did." Above them, the Dauntless's heavy cannons fired, intercepting the Planet Cracker warhead seconds before launch. The resulting explosion rocked the skies, but the planet was saved. Realizing they had lost the battle, the remaining Council forces began their retreat. The war wasn't over, but Xeran Prime was no longer under their control. The new era begins. As the fires of battle died down, Valera stood atop the ruined palace, looking over her reclaimed world. The people who had once mocked her now bowed. James stood beside her, arms crossed. "So, what's next?" Valera smiled faintly. Now we rebuild. We prepare. The war isn't over. The Council will return." James nodded. "Then we make sure they regret it." She turned to him, her expression softer now. "You could have left me, Carter, walked away before any of this began. But you didn't." James shrugged. "What can I say? I've got a thing for impossible causes." Valera chuckled. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't the soft, hesitant kiss of a broken princess. It was the declaration of a queen. When she pulled back, James blinked. "Well, that was unexpected." Valera smirked. "I don't believe in fate, James Carter, but I believe in choices. And I choose this." James grinned. "Then let's make history." As the new Xeran Empire rose from the ashes, the galaxy took its first breath under a new rule. And this time, humanity was at its side.